Welcome to Masters and Volts, a weekly podcast in which we bring you guests to talk about the business of electing candidates and influencing public policy. Masters and Volts, the business of politics, is about providing you information through our guests about what it takes to win elections and influence lawmakers. Whether we like it or not, politics is a business, and it takes money, people, and organization to win elections. I'm Merrick Masters, here with my co-host Bill Volz. Our guest today is Jason Roe, a political and communication strategist who has his own firm, RoeStrategic and LLC, in this space. Bill, say hello to Jason. Introduce yourself to the audience.
Jason, welcome. Looking forward to this. I'm Bill Volz, Distinguished Service Professor of Business Law and Ethics at the Mike Ilitch School of Business at Wayne State University. And let's begin.
And again, I'm Merrick Masters, and I'm a retired professor at Wayne State University in the School of Business. I retired in May of this year and have launched my second career in podcasting. Jason Roe has had an extensive and distinguished career in politics and government. I'm just going to highlight some of the things among his long list of accomplishments and roles that he's played. He has served as the former executive director of the Michigan Republican Party and worked in campaigns at the presidential, congressional, gubernatorial, and mayoral levels. He has worked on campaigns at the presidential level of Marco Rubio, Mitt Romney, and Bob Dole. He has also served in key staff positions at the congressional level and in the executive branch. He has been on the advance teams of Speaker Gingrich, Vice President Cheney, and Rick Perry for president. Jason has also been involved in promoting global development and democracy, serving as an election observer for presidential elections in Nigeria and Liberia. He worked in Iraq and training people for parliamentary elections. He's won a slew of awards, including dozens of the prestigious Polly Awards from the American Association of Political Consultants, and that's a top honor in the field of political consultancy. He was named top political consultant in San Diego by Our City magazine. In San Diego, he worked on the successful mayoral campaigns of Mayor Kevin Faulconer in 2013 and 2016, in which a Republican won in overcoming overwhelming Democratic advantage in voter registration. That is quite an accomplishment. Jason is a graduate of Western Michigan University with a degree in public administration and economics. Jason, welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate you putting a spotlight on this business that people think is pretty mysterious. And I have people ask me quite a bit about what it is that I do.
One of the things in our podcast we hope to do is break a little bit of those barriers about the mysteriousness of it, because it is a business which utilizes a lot of talents. It's really its own industry. It could have its own SIC code like other businesses do in politics, and it's a big business. And we want you to talk a little bit about your journey to what got you to the position you are, where you are the founder of your own firm and a political and communications strategist. We'd like to talk to you a little bit about that journey and the skills and abilities that you have, which brought you to this point.
Sure. First, I grew up in a political family. My father was the executive director of the Michigan Republican Party from 1969 to 1979. I was born in 70s. As a toddler, I was running around in the headquarters of the Michigan Republican Party. In fact, going back a few years from my father assuming that position, my parents actually met as staffers at the Michigan Republican Party in the early 60s. My mother was the designated staff person for the First Lady, Lenore Romney, and my dad was brought to Michigan by Governor George Romney. And fast forward, I ended up working for Mitt Romney as his deputy campaign manager. So we've had generations intertwined with the Romney family politically. So I grew up exposed to it, and I didn't know if it was interesting or not, but I think as I got into high school, it seemed to me very intriguing. My father, after stepping down as executive director in 79, started his own firm, Jerry D. Roe and Associates, and then Premier Strategy, in which he partnered with Peter B. Fletcher, who was the former Republican National Committee man for Michigan and was Governor Milliken's campaign manager in the 70s. And they did campaigns and public relations. And my dad dragged me all around the states. I still remember he would drop me off at former Deer while his daughter, Maureen Keene, ran for mayor. That was my dad's first client when he left the state party. So I knew Mayor Hubbard. He was a bit of an invalid at that point, but aware. And so I would go to Denny's with him for the afternoon for lunch and watch TV with him as a little kid. So I'd always grown up around politics. And I mean, I still remember the day that my father and I were driving. I was a senior in high school and I was getting ready to go to Western Michigan. And he asked me what I was going to study and what I wanted to do. And I said, I want to become a political consultant. And he did not like that at all for a couple of reasons. My dad was liberal Governor Milliken's hatchet man. And part of his job was to put down the rise of the conservatives, led by then State Representative John Engler and his good friend Spencer Abraham and their good friend Peter Secchia. And so my dad, as the hatchet man for the liberal governor, had to always go and put down these conservatives that were causing Governor Milliken problems. And that sidelined him when Engler became governor because he was a very strong governor that ran the party with an iron fist. And so I think my dad would prefer that I went out and made money and then got into politics so that my livelihood was never controlled by one of my enemies, as my dad, I think, found at a point in his career that he had to deal with. But I remember him saying, it's not a full-time job, it's seasonal. You can't make enough money. Now, he didn't know what was going to start happening in the 90s in campaigns, and he didn't know I was going to move to California, where campaigns were much more expensive and I would say profitable. Around the time I was graduating high school, there was a great movie that came out starring Richard Gere that was a very glamorous portrayal of political consult. The movie was called Power, and Richard Gere lived in a penthouse in Manhattan, and he flew on private planes, and he wore very nice suits. And as an 18-year-old going to college, that seemed like a pretty good lifestyle. It was in the era of Wall Street, which a lot of my friends decided they were going to be Wall Street brokers. I went a different path and was excited about politics. I got involved immediately. My first year, my freshman year, my dad was doing a congressional race of a guy that owned all the liquor stores in Kalamazoo. So I helped on the campaign and then worked nights at the liquor store, which also helped me steal kegs of beer from my fraternity brothers. And then throughout college, I volunteered. I became my fraternity's student body representative or student government representative. And even within the fraternity, when I look back, the two positions that I had in the fraternity are very much the ones that the politician, I was the rush chairman and I was the social chairman. So I think those are some of the more political jobs within. And then I would use pledges to go walk precincts for candidates. In 1992 state rep race, again in 1994, same thing. I'd make the pledges, go walk doors. I would drag candidates to fraternities and sororities on Sunday night during their chapter meetings. And so I got very involved. I became an elected precinct delegate in Kalamazoo while I was there. In my senior year, I interned for a state representative out of Portage, Dale Sugars. And then for the Michigan Restaurant Association and the Michigan Chemical Council, and got really a good view of how things worked in politics. And my then girlfriend, now wife, lived in Chicago. And for 2 years, we were doing this long distance, and we decided we should move somewhere and it should be warm. And in 1996, the Republican National Convention was in San Diego. So in the winter of 1995, we packed up and moved out there and chased the RNC, but also chased that sunshine. And it got me very involved in California politics and bounced around a lot. And I made a very close friend. And I was the Dole Kemp field rep in Southern California in 96. And that friend of mine was the California Republican Party field rep for the same territory. So we would travel the region and coordinate with the campaigns to carry our literature, to coordinate what they were doing with what the Dole Kemp campaign was doing. That was back when Republicans still thought we could compete in California. And what my friend and I kept seeing was really badly run campaigns, and they were being hijacked by the caucuses of the parties. The lower house in California is the state assembly. And so the assembly caucus, if you were a targeted race, would basically become your consultant. And so I still remember the 76th and the 78th assembly districts in the city of San Diego were 50-50 districts that Democrats had and Republicans had traditionally had. And you'd be in the 76th district and you would look at a mail piece, and then you would drive a couple miles down the road and you'd look at a mail piece in the 78th. It was the exact same mail piece. They just swapped out the name, the district number, and the picture. And my friend and I were like, these people are risking their reputation. They're putting their name on the ballot. They're raising and spending money, asking people to invest in them. And the best the caucus can do is cookie cutter, boilerplate mail on their behalf that isn't unique to them, isn't unique to the district. And so then he and I started plotting, we're going to start a consulting firm, and we're going to be the consultants we wish we had as managers. And that literally was our guiding principle. And we made a decision. He would move to Sacramento and I would move to Washington, D.C. We would get experience in those capital cities, build relationships, and then we would come back and we would start a firm. And we literally started plotting this out in 1996. And fast forward, we ended up doing it. It took much longer than we had planned, but in 2009, we launched a firm, Revolvus, and that's what got me in as a professional political consultant, which is what I've been doing ever since. Like, you're on mute. Erica, there. Yeah. Oh, you're still on mute.
What are the principal skills that you think you bring that gave you, obviously you have to have a lot of confidence in yourself to do this business, because a candidate's not going to want to go to a consultant who isn't confident about himself or about their ability. What is it that you bring to the table that makes you so attractive from this perspective?
Again, knowing that in high school, my senior year in high school, that this is what I wanted to do, I was very conscious about the path that I took. I wanted to do every job in politics so that when I was a consultant, I understood how those jobs needed to get done. So listen, I managed campaigns. I was a field director on a gubernatorial campaign. I was a political director. I launched my own fundraising firm at one point and did candidate fundraising. I was a congressional chief of staff. I was a congressional press secretary. I was a congressional communications director. So I've done everything that I have to manage as a consultant. And it was very intentional and it was very methodical. And I would say into my mid-30s, I was still looking for opportunities to go do, different aspects of this business so that I understand how it works. And I do think that does make me unique, because there's not a lot of people that have that DNA. A lot of people that become political consultants, quite frankly, go work at the Republican National Committee or the NRCC, and they were regional political directors. And so they had to oversee campaigns. So they think that just translates. Doesn't mean that they're not capable and qualified. I just have, I think, more boots on the ground experience doing those things. I think two things have helped me immeasurably. One is being a press secretary and knowing how to work with the media. And I'm finding even today, it's even more advantageous, because there's a lot of my peers that don't talk to the media because they're the enemy of the people. There's a lot of candidates and elected officials that don't talk to the mainstream media for these kind of politicized reasons. That's where the swing voters are. That's where the non-Republican voters are. It's easy to go into the Republican echo chamber and talk to yourself, but that's not how you win elections. You go outside of the bubble of your party and your base. And so having those relationships and the experience being a press person has been an incredible benefit to me. The other is fundraising. When I was a congressional chief of staff, I did the PAC fundraising for the member that I served. And so I reached out to every PAC director in Washington. I knew every lobbyist, and it helped me because my boss would tell a candidate, I'm going to host a fundraiser for you. That didn't mean my boss was going to host a fundraiser for him. That meant I was going to. But then I'd get on the phones and I would raise money. And jokingly, there was a period of time where Tom Reynolds, who was the NRCC chairman, would refer to me as the 436th member of Congress. Going back to that confidence, I would argue maybe I was a little bit too cocky and walked around like I was a member. And some of these guys said it about me derisively, but I was organizing fundraisers for candidates and members of the House Republican Conference. And when we have the NRCC annual dinner, in which every member office is told to go raise tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, you'd find me in the call suites raising money for those dinners. And I tell young people that meet with me for informational interviews, learn how to raise money, because it makes you invaluable to decision makers, because money is the lifeblood of this business. So if you know how to raise money and you can raise money, it gives you a little more stature, I think, in the eyes of decision makers. And so I think that's another thing that's really always benefited me.
I would really encourage people to go to your website and look at your bio, because it is very impressive, the range of things that you've done. You've been involved at campaign level and in the business of government. So you know how to deal with the media as a legislative representative and can advise on that. And you've also done such things as advance work, and nothing gets more detailed than advance work.
Or more stressful.
Or more stressful. I think that you have to have a tremendous amount of patience and tolerance in that business to do well. But Bill, I'll turn things over to you.
Thanks, Jason. I'm wondering if you could walk us through what a political strategist does, what maybe a more appropriate way to phrase that would be an average work week. How much time in this kind of activity, how much time in that? And I appreciate that it would change over time. It would change perhaps as an election neared. But what's an average work week? What are the activities that you incorporate as a political strategist?
For the civilians watching this, I like to compare what I do to being a wedding planner. You hire a wedding planner who works with the baker to make the cake, and works with the seamstress to make the dresses, and works with the pastor on the church and the procession. And you're choreographing a number of other people to do a job. And so I do think it's an imperfect analogy, but I think it makes sense to the novice trying to understand what it is that we do. And what I look at it is, I'm the one that has the experience. I'm the Sherpa. And when you have, let's just use a first-time candidate, they don't know what to do. They don't know what is, from the infrastructure to compliance with campaign finance laws, all the various things that will be thrown at them. They know as much as they know from watching cable TV, and maybe they saw The West Wing and they saw some glamorized view of what politics is. It ain't that glamorous. I think when I started dating my wife, she thought this was a really sexy gig. And then she saw the reality of going door to door on a Saturday morning and getting yelled at. And it's not quite as sexy as popular culture sometimes makes it. My job is first just to build out the infrastructure. I'm not someone who tries to make candidates fit the situation, changing their views, things like that. I think cynical outsiders might think that polling is used to maybe shape someone's views on things. I don't think most practitioners use polling for that. I think what we try to do is identify where the priorities of the candidate match up with the priorities of the district, and put an emphasis on those things that the voters care about in your district or state, rather than getting you to adopt the most popular issues within. Trust me, I've run campaigns for candidates that have very unpopular top priorities for their district. We just don't need to emphasize those. We can focus on maybe their second tranche of priorities as it relates to. So it's building out the infrastructure, building the team, the website, your social media platforms, your media lists, so that you can talk to the voters, developing the message. So you use some degree of polling for that. But a lot of it is just figuring out who someone is and telling the story of their biography, what qualifies them, what motivates them, and then what it is that they want to accomplish. Hiring a campaign manager, figuring out what our press strategy is. I do a lot of stuff that a lot of other general consultants don't do. We don't right now, and probably into the future. Corporate media does not have the budgets that they once had. They don't have the staff that they once had. I don't have, I know in campaigns in the 90s and in the aughts, I'd be talking to reporters at local papers every single day. And now I might talk to reporters every couple of weeks at publications in a district or that cover a district. So there's no need to hire a press secretary anymore. But given my background, I make it part of the scope of services that I provide as I work as your spokesperson and media contact, because one, knowing these people and working with them over the years, we have an established relationship. I am a source for a lot of stories that they work on outside of my campaigns. And so there's a currency in that they aren't necessarily going to burn me. I don't get a lot of gotchas from reporters that I have a relationship with because they also rely on me to be an available source to them on other things outside of my campaigns. That's a service that I provide, and I'll spend more time dealing with the press than a lot of other general consultants will. In terms of the time commitment, I would say before things get really hot and heavy, maybe I spend 10 hours a week on any one candidate. As things escalate and you get closer, and I'm writing and approving mail and working on media buys and digital placement and overseeing fundraising, that can get to be 15 to 20 hours a week. But I jokingly say I'm more of a knowledge worker than a laborer. I hire campaign staff to do the labor, and I am developing the strategy and the message and working on the tactical things that we need to do for other people to execute. So I think developing the message, you're figuring out who your target voters are, what your messaging is going to be, how you segment the electorate, how you communicate to the electorate. I do a weekly call with every one of my clients, every stakeholder that's on the campaign. I personally maintain the agenda of that, and we go through finance, we go through comms, we go through external, we go through grassroots, we go through what our opponent is up to. So it's a very comprehensive conversation every week. And then, you know what? I'm taking phone calls from the candidate, the finance director, and the campaign manager multiple times a day for any candidate that I have. You got to be available and accessible 24/7, whether you like to or not. But it's never dull. I've at earlier points in my life tried to leave politics and go do something normal, and it's boring. As crazy as the last few years have been in this business, every day is interesting. I've had exposure to things I could never imagine that I'd be exposed to. I've traveled, I've been parts of historical things. So it's an exciting business. It never gets boring. It might get monotonous, it might get taxing and stressful, but it's never boring.
I'm wondering, you've talked about a lot of critical players in your relationship with a campaign. Who is the ultimate boss for a strategic consultant? Is it the candidate? As you talked about hiring the campaign manager, I don't know, are they the boss? Who runs the show?
Yeah, I think there's been an evolution in that. When I was coming up in Michigan politics in the 90s, you really didn't have a political consulting class that dealt with, say, state legislative races the way we do today. So the manager, even though you're 22, 24 years old, you tended to be the boss at some level. Then I got out to California where they were making a lot more money and the consultants were definitely in charge and the campaign manager was merely an implementer of the consultant's approach. So I imagine every state in the 90s had a different approach. I do think now every race has gotten so much more expensive. You now do have general consultants that are doing these smaller races, even city council races. From my vantage point, it's not my name on the ballot, it's the candidates. And so they are the chairman of the board. And I usually use a corporate org chart to explain to people within the campaign how it works. At the end of the day, the candidate's the chairman of the board. I'm the CEO. And then the campaign manager, I would call the COO. But I also do a very collaborative way about going the campaign. I want everyone to be bought in. I want everyone's voice to be heard. And so part of that weekly call is everyone has an opportunity to chime in. One thing that I have learned over the years, and at age 54 and having done this now for, 34 years, I'm not necessarily going to be the guy that has the best idea. And sometimes that's what candidates think they're hiring. But I think my job is to identify the best idea. It might not be mine. It might be something that someone else on the campaign thought of, or something I saw on some other campaign, or some epiphany that just comes along one way or the other. But I think my experience and judgment of knowing what works, what doesn't work, figuring out what the best idea is and not owning it are important. I also don't force myself to make decisions or come up with messaging ideas because it's time. Because what I have found is sometimes I wait a couple days and then it just hits you like a thunderbolt. This is it. And so if I don't have what I think is the right answer or a smart strategy, I don't force myself to come up with it. That might sometimes frustrate the candidate or the staff, but I just don't. I want to do what I think is going to be the most effective, not what is going to meet a artificial timeline. And that comes from experience. You can be really talented young. One thing I remember when I worked on the Dole campaign, I didn't sleep any nights. I tossed and turned. I had so much anxiety because this is a presidential race and there's expectations of me because I was too young to know how unimportant I was in the scheme of this big picture. And also learning what a one-day story is and what is a 7-day story. Back then, it could be some mild reference to something negative in a story. And I would have ulcers over, did I cause that? And then you'd realize that the guys above me in the food chain didn't even notice and didn't care because to them, they've been through this. There is no good story for a Republican. And so you don't learn how to do that until you've had experience. One of the biggest races of my career to this day was Jim Rogan versus Adam Schiff in 2000. Jim Rogan was one of the 3 House impeachment managers, along with Lindsey Graham and Asa Hutchinson in the Clinton impeachment. He represented a D+8 district in Los Angeles County that included a couple of the major movie studios. Adam Schiff was a state senator who Jim had run against twice for the state legislature and beaten. So he and Schiff knew each other well. And it ended up being the biggest race of the 2000 cycle. At that point, we had smashed fundraising records. This is back when the federal contribution limit was $1,000. Rogan raised $7 million and Schiff raised 5.5. And this was really one of the first races where you started seeing independent expenditure, what we call super PAC now, money flowing in. And so you had the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the Republican National Committee coming in and spending in those races. And they knew we could not win. But President Clinton had made the mistake of saying in the New York Times that Jim Rogan was public enemy number 1. And so it had put such a target on his back. Jim had 70,000 donors out of that race because of his high profile in the impeachment. Conservatives around the country just sending checks. I don't remember what Schiff's donor count was, but it was a big high profile race. And even though I think the NRCC and the RNC were doubtful we could win, there were 4 other targeted races in California that cycle. And so the feeling was, is if we can draw all this money into Los Angeles, this super expensive media market, the second most expensive media market in the country, it's resources that wouldn't go up to Silicon Valley and the South Bay and the Inland Empire, where we've got guys that can win. And so I think they basically went all in for Jim. So I think back then that was a $20 million race. And I think the candidate, the 12.5 million combined spent between Adam and Jim in 2000, I don't think that record was broken. I think Vern Buchanan spent more, but he was a self-funder in Florida. But Michelle Bachmann in Minnesota had a very aggressive direct mail prospecting, and she tended to say insane things on a regular basis that really work well in direct mail fundraising. And so she finally, I think, broke our record 14 years later using crazy. But for 14 years, that was the most expensive congressional race in history.
Merrick, back to you.
I'd like to focus a little bit now about your taking a look at your overall career. Are there successes, a couple of successes that you would think are signature successes of yours that you point to and think these are really good things? And then on the other side, are there some disappointments, major disappointments? Not that the disappointments are your fault or anything, but just things didn't turn out the way you wanted them to.
Yeah.
If you could talk about both of those sides of the coin, if you will.
Sure. I would say there's there's 3 that are my favorites. Number 1 is Peter Roskam versus Tammy Duckworth in 2006. This was the cycle that Republicans lost the majority. Tammy Duckworth, double amputee Iraq war veteran. She was the hand-picked candidate of Rahm Emanuel, who was the DCCC chairman. It was in Rahm Emanuel's backyard in the Chicago suburbs. Speaker Hastert was in the adjacent district. This was a very high-profile race. It was Henry Hyde's congressional seat. Chairman Hyde was retiring. Peter was a state senator who had served with Barack Obama. And this was largely a campaign was allegedly a campaign that was a referendum on the Iraq War and the Bush administration's handling of. And when I got hired, Peter was trailing in July of 2006 by 10 percentage points. And so I came in, and one thing that I had learned, having airdropped in a few races, is everyone immediately hates you because you're the wise guy from Washington, D.C. And I would come hat in hand and I would act like the country lawyer. I don't know anything about this community, this district. Can you please guide me? And coming in, I think, with that form of humility helped ingratiate me with people at the local level. And they immediately took me under their wing, and they were helping this dopey kid navigate this world. We did a bunch of things, and your podcast isn't long enough for me to share all the amazing anecdotes, but this was a race no one thought we could win. We took the Iraq War off the table because what I started to discover is that now Senator Duckworth, having served, was not as anti-war as people might perceive the politics of the time. She was nuanced in the language she used. And I said to Peter, you guys realize you're really have the same policy positions here. You're just using different rhetoric. Stop arguing with her. She's a veteran. You didn't serve. She lost her legs in the war. Start agreeing with her and move on to the things that we can win on. And he started doing it. And you could just tell she was frustrated that Peter wouldn't litigate the war. He would just say, oh, I agree with Tammy. Now let's talk about taxes. Let's talk about spending. On election night, we had a big hall I think we were in Wheaton, Illinois, and I was about 6 Bud Lights in. And we had TVs around the perimeter of the ballroom, and I hear all these people cheering, and I'm thinking to myself, oh, these dumb bastards are going to be so disappointed when these results get announced. And they kept cheering. And I was staying away from the TV. I was in the middle of the room, just avoiding it. And I went backstage, and I'm talking to Peter. And while we're standing there, the phone rings, and he looks down, and it's Mayor Daley. And I look at him and I go, son of a bitch, we won. Because if there's any city in America in which the mayor knows the results of the election before the elections officials, it is Richard Daley in Chicago. And it was congratulations. And we're like, oh my gosh, we pulled this off. I was the only targeted race in the country to win that election. It was really exciting. No one could believe we pulled it off. So that one was my proudest. Bill, you had mentioned San Diego. Kevin Faulkner was a friend of mine. We had worked on his city council campaigns. We had just lost narrowly a race for mayor in 2012 to Bob Filner with a different candidate. Kevin and I started going drinking once a week and plotting out a campaign. And then Bob Filner resigned in disgrace, and there was a special election. We ran against a Latino candidate in a city that is 1/3 Latino. We launched our campaign in the barrio. Our first ads were Spanish language. The whole thing was to take this blonde-haired, blue-eyed surfer and make him appealing to Latinos. And we got outspent 2-1. And in a city that had 40% Democrat registration and 25% Republican registration, we got 53%. Kevin ran for re-election against a Latina, got 57%. And was, by most measures, pretty successful. And then one is just a revenge race. The congressman that I worked for in Orlando, Florida, after I had left, he lost his reelection. He had unfortunately gone on a trip to Scotland with Jack Abramoff. And though my former boss hadn't done anything, it was guilt by association in those times. And so the DCCC and his opponent just slaughtered him with ads attacking him for being corrupt. He was never charged. He was never a target of any investigation. Good luck explaining that in that time. 2 years later, an obscure state legislator with not much of a bedside manner decided to run. She was underfunded. She was running, among other people, she was running against the CEO of Morton's Steakhouse, who was a self-funder, a woman who is now Pete Sessions' wife. He was at the time the NRCC chairman, was apparently having a little behind closed doors relationship with her. It was a 5-person race. We got outspent significantly. Somehow we won that damn primary, again, being outspent by the Morton's exec. Actually, it was Ruth Chris. His last name was Morton, but he worked at Ruth Chris. He outspent us 3-1. The other candidate outspent us 2-1. And we won the primary. And then we went on to beat the woman who had beat my boss by 20 percentage points. And that was the largest margin of the defeat of any incumbent Democrat in 2010. So I was very proud to be a part of that one.
Bill, I'm going to turn things over to you.
By the way, I did not answer your question about my heartbreaks.
Yeah, well, I didn't want to force you if you didn't want to
No,
talk.
you know what? That 2000 race against Adam Schiff, I know other people thought we were going to lose, but I thought we were going to win. Jim Rogan was a special guy, high school dropout, raised by his grandparents because his mother was a convicted felon, grew up in the Mission District of San Francisco, was a lifelong Democrat, became a gang murder prosecutor in Los Angeles County in the 80s during the heyday of the Crips and the Bloods. And he was looking around at what Democrats were perpetuating. And he said, I can't do this. Here's a guy who was chair of a Democratic Party organization up in the Bay Area in his young adulthood. And he switched parties and he got elected to the state assembly and became majority leader in his first term. He was just, an aspirational figure, a real Horatio Alger personal story. And so I was crying like a baby on election night. And then my other boss who lost in 2008, I was not, I took a leave of absence and went down and helped on his campaign. But 3 weeks out from the election, we got a poll back that said there was no chance that we were going to win. And he was one of the most selfless people I know, Tom Feeney. And he called NRCC Chairman Tom Cole at the time. And he said, listen, I can't win. Don't spend any money on me. Save it for the others that you can still save. And it gave Tom incredible love amongst the House Republicans because no one ever does that. No member does that. These guys want to be in office so bad. And for Tom to call and say, go save the guys you can save, cut me loose. And so we all then went to a dive bar in the outskirts of Orlando, the whole staff, and drank pitchers of beer all day and cried and reminisced, and then sleptwalked through the last 3 weeks of the campaign since we already knew that we were dead men walking. So these are obviously personal ones. These are two men that I'm still incredibly close to and admire and consider my mentors in politics.
That's interesting. You mentioned that. I have to mention this one story. In one of my former lives, I ran for the U.S. Congress as a Democrat in 1992 for the nomination. I was seeking the nomination to run against Rick Santorum.
Oh, really?
And I didn't get the nomination, but a Republican who turned Democrat at the last minute, a state senator, got it. It's a kind of a messy story, but I remember meeting a lot of candidates on both sides of the aisle, and it was a very addictive experience because I loved every minute of it, even though it's not nearly as glamorous as people think it is, not by any stretch of the imagination. But I remember one of the most selfless, perhaps the most selfless person that I met. And the one I really liked the most was a demure congressman from the city of Pittsburgh by the name of Bill Coyne. And I don't know if you ever came across Bill or not, but he was like Feeney in the sense that he never thought of himself. He never promoted himself. He was really one of a rare breed in that business. And so I had so much appreciation for him. But I guess we can blame you for Adam Schiff now. Is that something?
Oh, I joke with my friends all the time. I'm the reason we have Adam Schiff. I will share. I had to debate him one time because Jim was always stuck in Washington because there'd be 4-day work weeks and 6 hours in a plane and it's 3 time zones. So Jim could not get back very often. And Adam could just hop on a puddle jumper from Sacramento and be back down in the district in 90 minutes. And there was a local chamber debate and Jim couldn't make it. So I stood in for him. And as the campaign manager, there's things I can say that the candidate can't say. So I'm just throwing haymakers at Adam and he can't really attack me. And I remember I'm in the car driving back to the office afterwards and a local reporter from the Glendale News Press calls me and he goes, what did you do to Schiff? And I go, why? And he goes, he just called me screaming about what an asshole you are. And I'm like, I was successful then. I accomplished what I set out to do.
Yeah, I understand that feeling very much. Bill, I'll turn things over to you.
I'm wondering, just as a conclusion, maybe your sense of the political strategies of the political parties as we're approaching the 2024 elections, presidential, maybe congressional, maybe the state legislature, our state house is, I think, very much in place. This election, how are we positioned? How are the parties positioned strategically?
Yeah. And let's start at the top. I think we have now moved beyond at the presidential trying to persuade undecideds. I don't believe undecideds are what that word implies. The only thing undecideds are undecided about at this point is, can they figure out a way to vote for Kamala Harris? Because there's no new information on Donald Trump. You're not going to learn anything new. And when you look at the last 2 months, just the huge moments that this election has offered us compared to the history of this country at 248 years old. First, you had the absolutely disastrous debate performance in an unusually early June 27th
Yeah.
presidential
I
debate.
think a setup, if I might say.
Oh, yeah. And the fact that Biden went along with it, but worked to Trump's advantage. But frankly, the Trump team was too clever by half because they got exactly what they wanted. They got the outcome they wanted, and it probably cost them in the long run. So you have this absolute faceplant. And now everyone knows what so many on the right had been saying, is that Joe Biden physically and intellectually is not who he once was and not up to the job. But the numbers didn't move. It was really remarkable that they barely moved. And so that told me that Trump's at his ceiling and Biden's at his floor. Then you have an assassination attempt, which should have given Trump some bounce of a couple points. It gave nothing. Then you have the switch, which gave a temporary mild bump to the Democratic ticket. But then, even with an incredibly choreographed consolidation and rollout, and the mainstream media working in concert to protect and reinvent Kamala Harris, still didn't substantially move the numbers. Now we've just recently had a second assassination attempt, and we're still margin of error. We're still talking about the same 7 battleground states. And so what does that mean to me? Listen, if you say you're undecided, it's not because you're waiting to find out if you like Trump or not, if you do or not. You're still open to him. It's, can you get around to supporting her? So I think it's going to be very much rallying the base and trying to figure out, identify your voters and making sure they show up, rather than persuading the persuadable. At the U.S. Senate level, Republicans need 2 seats. With Joe Manchin retiring in West Virginia, that's a done deal. Tim Sheehy has a 6-point lead as of September in Montana. I think, John Tester's probably taken that about as far as he can in a state that has stayed blue at the senatorial level a lot longer than the rest of the state has. My father's from Montana. It's always been a little bit blue, a little bit red. Just Democrats are different out there. Republicans are different out there. And then there's Ohio. Trump won Ohio by double digits. That is a race right now within the margin of error. But the incumbent Senator Sherrod Brown is a working class guy. He's always been very closely aligned with the working class and labor. He's got his own brand. He's won a lot of races in that state. So we only need 2. We got those 2. You look around the rest of the country, Larry Hogan in Maryland, his best days were the first 2 or 3 months of his campaign. He's trailing in the polls. I don't know how he can pull that out in a deep blue state, even as a never Trumper. Pennsylvania's tough. I think that McCormick is tethered to Trump. How Trump does, he does. In Wisconsin, I think Eric Hovde might be one of the worst candidates in America. I think that Tammy Baldwin, who got elected as a liberal in the 90s, has mainstreamed herself and comes across as this very likable grandmother. And then you look at Jackie Rosen, the Democrat in Nevada. I think she's in pretty safe space. Carrie Lake's a disaster in Arizona. She's, trailing Trump double digits. So when you look, Michigan really is the only other one that I think provides a real opportunity. But in the last 50 years, we've had 19 U.S. Senate races, and Republicans have won 1. And that was in the 1994 wave, which you almost couldn't lose. Prior to that, Bob Griffin, who was appointed to the U.S. Senate and won re-election, I think in 72, is the last Republican that we had in the state. So it's a tough state, but Mike Rogers has a great bio. But let's face it, Alyssa Slotkin is a fundraising machine. She has tricked everyone into believing she's some kind of a centrist, even though her voting record doesn't support that. And I tip my hat to her. She's very deft at what she does. Still going to be tough, but I think I put it in the 3rd or 4th top opportunity. When you go around the country and you look at the 25 or so House seats that are swing seats, and that means Republican and Democrat held, I think Republicans are very well situated. And sometimes people forget that Republican candidates for Congress have always run ahead of Donald Trump. So Trump can lose a district and a Republican congressional candidate can overperform. The disadvantage, though, is the amount of money on the Democratic side at every level just dwarfs. It could very well be between the House, the Senate, and the presidential, a 2-to-1 advantage for Democrats. And I know you guys are seeing it in the Detroit media market. I was watching the news this morning, and it is just ad after ad, and it's 3-to-1. And it's usually not this saturated this early. It's 3-to-1 Democrat spending right now. So that might keep Democrats in the game, but Republicans will get control of the Senate. We will hold the House. I think we'll pick up a couple seats. And I think the presidential is a jump ball. Trump never led in the polls in 2016 or 2020. He has led, and he is certainly within the margin of error. So he's polling better than ever. Trump voters are hard. We know that from history, but I'm seeing things that I didn't see before. In my neighborhood in Bloomfield Hills in 2020, there was 1 Trump sign in my neighborhood. I went running this morning. There are 6. I talked to one of the other dads who told me in his neighborhood in 2020, there were 1. There are now 20. I bring that up because I think there's a lot of people out that are more willing to say I'm with Trump today than there was before. So is there still underrepresentation of Trump voters? I say yes, because even the Trump campaign is targeting for their grassroots activities low propensity voters. What they're telling their activists is, we're going to send you a list of 25 voters who never vote. We need you to find them. We need you to get their mobile phone numbers, because that's how off the grid they are. And if we can turn those people out, Trump can win. And that is going to be key to him winning, is finding that underrepresented voters that propelled him in 16 and made it competitive for him in 20.
Barry, how about the state legislature?
Yeah.
We've had the courts involved. We've got the redistricting, which was peculiar. What's the chances of the state house going Republican?
Yeah, the Republicans will get the state house back. They only
I think
need
so too.
There's probably 12 Democratic seats that we have real good chances in. Of those, only a couple of them are even double-digit Democrat, but they're ones that were previously held by Republicans. So take Tommy Brand's House seat out in Kent County. You know, he just got out of politics and now he's running again. That's a prominent name in the community. You've got Joey Andrews, a liberal that represents the Southwest coastal area. He campaigned as someone that was opposed to windmill farms on the coast. And then when the Democrats started pushing through the permitting, putting it in the hands of the state, which would basically allow the state to overrule local officials and do wind in that district, and Joey Andrews voted for that. There's a lot of non-Republican voters that are really ticked off at Joey Andrews for reversing himself on that issue. And then you look at downriver Detroit, there's some Democrats that probably shouldn't have won to begin with. And my feeling is, with the funding advantages Democrats had in 22, with the win that they had at their back, Gretchen Whitmer outspent Tudor Dixon 80 million to 8 million. The Prop 3 abortion initiative, which turned out voters that never vote, outspent the pro-life side 60 million to 20 million. You're not going to have that resource disparity. You're not going to have that wind at the Democrats' backs. If you are a Republican that survived 2022, you're going to come back in 2024. If you're a Democrat that got elected in 2022, your days are numbered. So I just think the opportunities, whether it is up in Traverse City or Marquette, you look around the map, I think Republicans are very well positioned.
Interesting. Merrick,
I'd just like to thank Jason so much for being with us today. It's been very informative.
Thank you.
And I would hope that people really take a good hard look at your bio and your website, because it's very impressive, the things that you do. And you've had such a remarkable career and are still a very young man and in this business, and very much have to offer to those who are looking for talent. So we wish you the very best. Thanks for appearing on Masters and Volz, the Business of Politics. And we hope our viewers will push the like and subscribe buttons. And Bill, I'll just let you say your farewell, and then we'll let Jason go. I know he's got an appointment to go to, so we don't want to keep him longer than necessary.
That appointment's a tea time.
yeah, there was that the fairway in the background gave you away. You're busted. Jason, it's been a pleasure. I love it. This is great stuff, very much at the heart of the business of politics. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I've enjoyed it.